Traders, how are you? With Marcello. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week, everything that happened with the economy, the markets, the financial markets, everything to prepare us for the great crisis that awaits us so we can make some money off of that, right? Remember, educational purposes only. This isn't financial advice. I'm not a trading advisor. But we had Elon Musk launching the Starship, one step closer to getting to Mars. We have the largest crypto exchange in the United States looking to leave the United States completely because of the war on crypto. And we even have the United States making the same decisions that the Roman Empire made right before their collapse. Let's go and get started. Overall for the week, we didn't have a ton of news, let's say. It was really just a matter of a lot of corporate earnings and bank earnings and some economic data. So it didn't really affect the markets too much, but we did have some interesting things that happened, which is another, let's say, stab or nail in the coffin of the US empire. Corporate earnings, I'll get to those in just a moment here. Overall, the U.S. markets were mostly negative, even though all of them were less than 1%. Canada, on the other hand, was positive by 0.75. European markets, mostly positive. Russia being the biggest positive there, being over 3%. Latin America, mostly lower. Chile now, which is the only first world country in Latin America, is deciding to start to nationalize their lithium industry, which can have a much larger effect on the economy as a whole. And I'm going to tell you why in just a moment. That's why I love to do these videos, so you can learn how to pick the dots, right? To be able to learn how things happen and how to take advantage of them. Africa and the Middle East, mostly lower. And then in the far, far east, Asia, and then Australia, New Zealand, the far, far east, mostly mixed there, with Thailand being the biggest loser there at over 2%. Bitcoin and crypto space. Coinbase, which is the largest crypto exchange in the United States and one of the exchanges that has actually tried to speak to the federal government to get guidelines on how to handle their situation with crypto. I don't know if you saw, I believe it was the SEC chairman, if I'm not mistaken. They were asking him specifically whether Ethereum was a commodity or security, and he didn't want to answer the question. They defined it for Bitcoin, but they just don't want to define it for anything else. And remember that they took down the Signature Bank, which was one of the banks that failed a few weeks ago out of New York, another one of the regional banks. And there was a previous senator that was on the board of this bank that talked about how they were completely viable. They didn't have any problems with deposits running or anything like that. And it's being supposed that they actually closed this bank to kind of shut down the banking access to anybody that wants to get crypto in the United States. So due to the war that they're launching against crypto, Coinbase, which is the largest exchange in the United States, got a Bahama license, and they may consider moving completely overseas. Now, this is a really bad thing, in my opinion, for both the crypto space and the United States, because outside of the fact that the United States is getting more socialist by the day, more government intrusion and laws and regulations, the innovation that we still have in the United States is a lot further ahead than anywhere else in the world. So even though I think crypto will be all right in the long run because, it's decentralized, how are you going to stop it, right? But it looks like the United States doesn't want anything to do with it. So if that actually leaves the United States, that might be a little bit of a short-term dent for the innovation in the space. And in addition to that, obviously the US is not going to have access to that, which is still one of the biggest markets in the world. Bitcoin for the week was lower, over 11%. On Saturday morning, it got just a touch over 27,300. So we had that big run so far to 30K. Now we're starting to retrace a little bit. In commodities, most of the US, well, let me rephrase that. Most of the energy prices have gone down, in addition to a lot of the dollar-based assets, which is mostly everything in the world. All the materia prima, you say in Spanish. I always do the Spanish videos first, so I keep thinking in Spanish. All the commodities, raw materials, everything's priced in dollars for the most part. So we had a little bit of a drop when it came to oil prices because of that reason. The U.S. crude dropped almost 6% to 77.87. That's good for gas prices. Brent went down by over 5% as well to 81.66. And one of the things that was interesting is we haven't talked about food shortages in quite a while, and now we might have a rice shortage, which affects most most of my Latins, which, most Americans, I don't think eat a lot of rice. I think you guys eat more pasta and stuff, right? Let me know. I haven't been in the US living there for like 10 or 12 years or something. So I don't know what you guys eat anymore in America. But the biggest producers, for example, places like China and Pakistan, bad weather. In addition to that, India also had a situation. I believe they actually increased the production, but it's not going to be enough to cover the shortfall. And this is going to be the worst shortfall in rice for 20 years. And 3.5 billion people actually rely on rice, mostly in Southeast Asia and Asia. So that can have a lot of effects kind of down the chain. Chile's president, communist president Gabriel Boric said on Thursday that they're going to nationalize the lithium industry. It's the second largest producer of the essential product that are needed in the EV batteries. He's saying that it's to boost the economy and protect the environment, but it shocked investors because Chile, if you didn't know, is actually the only first world country in Latin America, the only country in Latin America as well where they allow them to come into the US without a visa. And this is going to have a lot of effects because if you didn't know, Chile is actually the biggest exporter of copper in the world. And if you didn't know, all the electric in your house basically is on copper wires, cars, everything. Not, I want to say the vast majority because they're coming up with new technologies and things like that. But so imagine investors now are going to be weary of investing in Chile, one of the places in Latin America that receive, one of the top amounts of foreign investment in the world, because now, well, if I'm going to go open up a mine that costs $100 millions, is this president just going to nationalize the industry and give me 10 cents on my dollar? See what I mean? So this is not bueno at all. But most of the world is going into this kind of communist socialist environment. So let's enjoy it while it lasts, right? Gold went down by over 1%, 1,984. Silver went down as well by over 1% to 2517. In finance and banking news, the cost of insuring the U.S. sovereign debt has exploded to a record high. There's something called CDS or credit default swaps, where essentially this is the same thing that happened, for example, when we had the situation with the collapse of the banks. They have these insured products, or let's say banks and governments have these products where you can insure yourself against a default, because the US could never go default, right? They could never stop paying their bills, just like the Roman Empire didn't, and the United Kingdom didn't either, the British Empire. But the cost of insuring the US debt exploded. And so now people are worrying about, well, is the U.S. going to keep paying its debt or not? And this is mainly due to the fact that we have that debt limit approaching, and obviously the squabbling in Washington is affecting that quite a bit. The U.S. now is sitting on 120% of GDP in their debt, meaning that the size of the economy, the debt is about 120% of the size of the economy. Anytime that a country gets to about 100%, they start to have a lot of financial problems. And this actually goes back to 2008 and 2009, where a lot of the governments, to help, quote unquote, the economy, they started taking out debt and injecting it into the economy to keep things running smoothly. What they have actually found is that when you get to about 90% of GDP when it comes to the debt, every dollar of debt that you inject into the economy, you get less than a dollar in reward. So there's a diminishing rate of return, and the whole world practically now is almost over at 100%. I believe the number, don't quote me on this, you guys can look it up on Google, but it's over 350%, the global debt to GDP. So not bueno at all. The estimated cost to service the debt now is $800 billion a year. That's about 17% of the actual budget that is not with debt. There's about 4.2. These numbers aren't going to be exact, but they're an overall number so you get an idea. The budget without the debt is about 4.2 trillion, if I'm not mistaken, where if you add the debt, it's over 5 trillion. And the amount of money that we're spending is not, it's not like we're just spending what we receive, right? What's actually happening is we're taking on debt to be able to have a bigger budget, and the government is spending a lot more than the money that we have coming in. So the amount of the cost of the debt is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And at some point, we're just not going to be able to pay our bills anymore. This is on top of the fact, if you remember last week, I talked about how people are not using the dollar anymore either. So now the demand for the dollar is starting to go down. Roughly about 70% of the dollars in the world are outside of the United States. So now, if a lot more people stop using the dollar, all those dollars come back home. We're going to start to see a huge devaluation of the dollar, which means that inflation could skyrocket and most likely will. And this is, you guys ready? This is what I think they're doing on purpose to make sure we accept their 2030 World Economic Forum. You're going to own nothing and be happy. You're going to eat bugs. You're going to have to pay for your rent. You're never going to be able to own a house, especially now since you can't afford it anymore. And you're going to use the government coin, the CBDCs, where you're not going to be able to spend the money because you bought too much meat one week. You didn't buy enough crickets that week. Yum, yum. There's a new bipartisan bill that's going to let the US Mint alter the metal content of coins to save money. In 2022, the cost of the raw materials drove the price of minting a nickel to 10 cents. Remember, a nickel is worth 5 cents in the market, more than double than the value of the coin itself. So if you guys didn't know, the Roman Empire, when they collapsed, what they were doing is they were mixing the metals in their silver coins and their coins as well. So when they were paying China, for example, with a silver coin, they started to put 90% silver and then 80% silver and then 50% silver. And eventually the Chinese caught them, and other people that they were paying caught them, and they just stopped accepting the money because they weren't good for it anymore. That's what we're walking into right now too. Inflation is going down in India. The annual wholesale price inflation got to the lowest level in the last 30 months, which is a good thing. The UK also, their inflation went down from 10.4 in February to 10.1 in March, but they still have the highest inflation in the entire Eurozone. Western Alliance, which is a regional bank, their shares surged over 16% on Wednesday when the company said that they had an increase of $2 billion in deposits after the first 2 weeks of April. So it looks like the banking crisis is over for now. And in data showed on Friday, the economic recovery unexpectedly gathered pace in the Eurozone this month after the dominant service industry survey saw a buoyant demand rise. And remember that most of the developed nations like the US and most of Europe and Canada and Australia, China's getting there too, the biggest percentage of the economy is consumer spending. So if that starts to recover, for example, in Europe, that's going to help the economy quite a bit. In the United States, for example, it's almost 70% of the economy. So that helped a downturn in the manufacturing, because remember, Germany, for example, which is the largest economy in Europe, is a huge manufacturer, cars, all kinds of things. And as I mentioned to you guys, I think I already mentioned to you guys, I believe I did here in the beginning, that the cost of the insuring the debt in the United States from a default got to a record high. The political news, Fox News is settling a legal threat of over $787 billion with the Dominion voting systems. And they also have another $2.7 billion in lawsuits. This is back from the election where they stated on the news network that they were rigging the elections with the machines, but they got a bunch of lawsuits because supposedly it was false. And they're starting to settle those lawsuits to be able to not have to go to trial. And a new rule in the Biden administration is going to force U.S. homebuyers with good credit to pay higher mortgage rates to pay for the people who had bad credit. So now the people who did everything properly are going to have to pay the cost of people who didn't do things properly. 2008 all over again. Economic news, Swedish government is preparing for a deeper than expected recession in 2023, according to data released on Monday. Not the biggest economy in the world, but obviously still affects that Eurozone, which altogether, Europe together, is the third largest economy in the world after the United States and China. The March housing data, the housing starts came down 20% than a year ago. Remember that the housing market is roughly about 17% of the economy. So if we have consumer spending, which is almost 70%, then we have the housing market, which the new housing starts went down by 20%. The housing market is 17%. Imagine 87% of the economy in the United States not kind of moving the way it's supposed to, which means we're not heading in a good direction. Corporate news, Netflix went down 3% on Wednesday after they announced that they weren't going to be strict on the password sharing. Yay, win for the consumer. Their revenue also fell short of what expectations were in the market. Tesla fell by over 2% on Wednesday, almost 10% on Thursday after they provided their Q1 report. The revenue was just short of the expectations as well. They also said, remember, that they were going to open up a factory on the other side of the border in Mexico, which that'll help them probably shore up some of those margins. They also increased the price, if I'm not mistaken, of the Model Y to be able to go ahead and increase their margins as well. AT&T shares fell 10% on Thursday after they had the worst drop in share price in over 2 decades as cash flow falls. Revenue and earnings slipped, and they didn't meet their expectations either. And then an insect farming startup called Winesect SaaS, basically insect with a Y, received $175 million in financing to be able to go ahead and start developing proteins for humans, because they want you to eat bugs instead of meat. Yum, yum. Trade news, not a lot going on there. In technology, a news outlet in Kuwait unveils the country's first ever virtual news presenter, which was generated by artificial intelligence. So it looks like even that job is not going to be available in the future either. And it stunned everybody because it was literally just a computer talking about the news. And now, instead of having news reporters and everything, they just need to have an AI listing the news for the AI presenter to actually talk about the news. So we're just going to live in a utopia soon. On Thursday, Elon Musk SpaceX launched a Starship rocket for the first time. This is the first step to get to Mars. What I thought was really interesting is not the fact that, they learned a lot. The rocket blew up right after it took off, which isn't a bad thing. This is actually a good thing. They didn't even think that it would get off the ground. But this is going to revolutionize the way we travel around the world and also ship goods around the world. So imagine now you can ship anything around the world for the most part within 30 minutes, and you can get anywhere in the world within an hour. Can you imagine that? Because you hop on the rocket, it goes into space where there's no resistance, right? Because there's no wind and things like that. It just goes up, goes around the world, and comes back down. So now you won't even need container ships anymore, because you could just send something from China to New York, for example, in under an hour in one of these Starship rockets. Can you imagine? Investment news, Norway's $1.4 trillion sovereign wealth funds, which is one of the largest in the world, stated that they're going to vote against a resolution to adopt tougher greenhouse gas targets. They're also going to reduce the amount of drilling. I didn't say that properly. They stated that they were going to reduce drilling by 40%, the gas output levels by 2030, but now they're only going to do it by 25%. So they dropped the amount that they're saying that they were going to drop by, which I still don't think I'm saying it properly, but I think you guys understand me. International news, scorching temps in Asia this week. Thailand hit a record of more than 113 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 45 degrees Celsius. Bangladesh is also hitting April temperatures of above 104 degrees Fahrenheit or 40 degrees Celsius. And even China is getting in a bit of trouble now that it's being impacted by a drought, which is affecting one of their aluminum hubs. China's foreign minister Qin Gang said on Friday that both sides of the Taiwan Strait belong to China and that it's right and proper for China to uphold its sovereignty. As I mentioned in one of the previous videos, think that they're probably going to go after Taiwan after seeing what happened to Ukraine. They're probably going to do it in this presidency. An interesting facts this week: a research team off the coast of Cartagena, Colombia, found billion-dollar shipwreck with the San Jose, and now the bureaucracy ensues. They're suing. The government wants their piece, et cetera, et cetera. And a late season storm in California brought more snow to the Sierra Nevadas as it broke snow records in 18 resorts. And you can see all the freaky weather happening, right? All those earthquakes and stuff in Turkey recently. The Fort Lauderdale airport, if you guys remember, I talked about last week, had to close because they had a record amount of rain. It's going to get heavy. So that's the news this week, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Don't forget to subscribe. And remember, the preppers were right.